The county morgue was a squat, concrete building that smelled of antiseptic and something sharper, something you couldn't quite name but felt in your bones. I'd taken the night shift job because it paid better than the gas station, and I figured, how hard could it be? Sit in a quiet building, log paperwork, maybe sneak a nap. I was 23, broke, and didn't scare easy. At least, that's what I told myself when I signed on. The first night was uneventful. I sat in the small office with its flickering fluorescent light, a desk cluttered with forms, and a coffee machine that hissed like it held a grudge. The morgue itself was down a short hallway, stainless steel tables, refrigerated drawers, and a silence so thick it pressed against your ears. My job was simple: monitor the security cameras, log any deliveries, and keep the place locked down until the morning crew arrived. Easy money, I thought. It was the third night when things got weird. I was halfway through a stale vending machine sandwich when the security monitor flickered. The screen showed the main autopsy room, empty except for the tables gleaming under the overhead lights. But for a split second, I swore I saw a shadow move across the far wall, quick, like someone darting out of frame. I leaned closer, squinting at the grainy feed. Nothing. Just the same sterile room. I chalked it up to tired eyes and too much caffeine. Around 2 a.m., I heard it. A faint scrape, like metal on metal, coming from the autopsy room. The hairs on my neck stood up. I grabbed the flashlight from the desk, more for comfort than necessity, and headed down the hall. The air grew colder the closer I got, the antiseptic smell sharper. I pushed open the heavy door to the autopsy room, half expecting to find a rat or a loose pipe. The room was empty, just as the camera showed, but one of the refrigerated drawers, number 17, was slightly ajar. I froze. I'd checked those drawers at the start of my shift, like always. They were all locked tight. No one else was in the building, no deliveries, no staff, just me. I stepped closer, my sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. The drawer was open just an inch, enough to see the edge of a white sheet inside. My hand shook as I reached for the handle. I told myself it was a mechanical glitch, maybe a latch that hadn't caught right. I pulled the drawer open. Empty. Just a folded sheet, pristine and untouched. I slammed it shut, the clang echoing too loudly in the quiet. My heart was hammering, but I laughed it off, muttering about overactive imaginations. Still, I double-checked the locks before heading back to the office. The rest of that shift passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The cameras showed nothing, the building was silent, but every creak of the old structure made me jump. When the morning crew arrived at 6 a.m., I didn't mention the drawer. I didn't want to sound like the new guy spooked by shadows. The next night, I came prepared: extra coffee, a playlist to drown out the silence, and a determination to stay rational. But around midnight, the lights in the office started flickering. Not the usual fluorescent buzz, but a deliberate on-off-on, like someone flipping a switch. I checked the breaker box in the hall. Everything was fine. When I got back to the desk, my playlist had stopped. The screen on my phone showed a track I hadn't queued. White noise, just static, looping endlessly. I yanked the earbuds out and tossed the phone onto the desk. Get a grip, I told myself. But then I heard it again, that same metallic scrape, louder this time, from the autopsy room. I grabbed the flashlight and a crowbar from the maintenance closet. If something was messing with me, I wasn't going down without a fight. The autopsy room was colder than the night before, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. Drawer 17 was ajar again, but this time, the sheet inside was crumpled, like someone had grabbed it and let go. I didn't open it. Instead, I checked the other drawers, yanking each one out with a growing sense of dread. All empty. I was about to leave when I noticed the scalpel tray on the counter. One blade was missing. I backed out of the room, crowbar gripped tight, and locked the door behind me. Back in the office, I pulled up the camera feed. The autopsy room was empty, but the shadow was back, fainter this time, lingering near drawer 17. I rewound the footage. Nothing. No movement, no shadow, just static. I called my supervisor, but the line went to voicemail. I left a message, trying to sound calm. Hey, something's up with the equipment. Might need maintenance. By 3 a.m., I was wired, jumping at every sound. That's when the phone rang, the landline on the desk, not my cell. The caller ID showed an internal extension, Autopsy RM1. My stomach dropped. No one was in there. I let it ring, the shrill tone cutting through the silence. It stopped after 10 rings, then started again. I picked it up, heart pounding. Hello? My voice sounded small. Static. Then a low, rasping sound, like someone breathing through a clogged throat. I slammed the receiver down and unplugged the phone. The security monitor flickered again, and this time, the shadow wasn't a shadow. It was a shape, human, vague, standing in the center of the autopsy room. The feed cut to black. I don't remember grabbing my keys, but I was halfway to the exit when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, echoing in the hall. I didn't turn around. I hit the door, fumbled with the lock, and stumbled into the parking lot. The night air was warm, but I was shivering. I didn't go back inside until dawn, when the morning cruise van pulled up. I told my supervisor everything. He didn't laugh, didn't call me crazy. He just nodded like he'd heard it before. Some places hold on to things, he said. You're not the first to notice. He offered me a day shift, but I quit on the spot. I didn't care about the money anymore. I haven't been back to the morgue since. I drive a different route to avoid passing it. But sometimes, late at night, I hear that rasping breath in my dreams, and I wake up checking the locks. Whatever was in that morgue, it wasn't just me in there. And I'm not sure it stayed behind when I left. It was a cold November night, the kind where the wind bites at your knuckles and your breath hangs in the air like a ghost. I was working the graveyard shift at St. Mary's Hospital, a sprawling, outdated building on the edge of town. I'd been a security guard there for 3 years, long enough to know every creak of the old pipes and every flicker of the fluorescent lights. The job was mostly routine, checking doors, monitoring cameras, and occasionally shooing away a drunk who wandered too close to the ER. But that night, something shifted. Something I can't explain, no matter how many times I replay it in my head. The hospital's security office was a cramped room in the basement, tucked between the laundry and the morgue. It smelled like stale coffee and ozone from the ancient monitors. My coworker Dave had called in sick, so I was alone, staring at a bank of grainy black and white screens. Around 2 a.m., I noticed something odd on the morgue camera. The morgue was a place I avoided. Nobody likes being around the dead, and I'd heard enough stories from the older guards to steer clear unless absolutely necessary. But that night, the camera feed caught my eye. There was a flicker like static, but it wasn't the usual glitch. It looked like movement. I leaned closer, squinting at the screen. The morgue was a sterile, tiled room with steel tables and a wall of refrigerated drawers. The camera was positioned in the corner, giving a wide view of the space. Nothing should have been moving. The last autopsy had been hours ago, and the staff had long since clocked out. But there it was again, a shadow, faint but unmistakable, passing across the frame. My stomach twisted. I told myself it was a trick of the light, maybe a reflection from the hallway. But the morgue's door was closed. I checked the lock log. No one had entered since 6 p.m. Against my better judgment, I rewound the footage. The system was old, clunky, with a tape deck that whirred like it was chewing the cassette. I scrubbed back 10 minutes and hit play. At first, nothing. Just the empty room, the tables gleaming under the harsh lights. Then, at the 2:03 mark, the shadow appeared again. It wasn't a person, not exactly. It was too tall, too thin, its edges blurry like smoke. It glided across the room, pausing at one of the drawers, the one marked Doe J, male 34. My heart thudded. I knew that drawer. We'd gotten a John Doe earlier that day, a guy found in the river. No ID, no next of kin. The coroner said he'd been dead at least a week. I should have stopped there. I should have called my supervisor, logged the glitch, and moved on. But I couldn't look away. The shadow lingered, then vanished. A minute later, the drawer, the one for John Doe, jiggled. Not much, just a slight tremor, like someone had bumped it. Except no one was there. My mouth went dry. I rewound again, played it frame by frame. The drawer moved. I was sure of it. I don't know what possessed me, but I grabbed the flashlight and my keys. The morgue was just down the hall, a 30-second walk. I told myself I'd check the door, make sure it was locked, and go back. The hallway was silent except for the hum of the lights and the distant clang of the furnace. The morgue door was heavy, steel, with a keypad lock. I punched in the code, my hands shaking. The lock clicked, and I pushed the door open. The air inside was frigid, sharp with the smell of antiseptic and something else, something metallic, like old blood. The room looked exactly like the camera feed, empty, sterile, lifeless. I shone my flashlight across the tables, the drawers. Everything was in place. I walked to the John Doe drawer, my boots echoing on the tiles. The handle was cold, heavier than I expected. I hesitated, my breath clouding in front of me. Then I pulled. The drawer slid out smoothly, revealing the body bag. It was zipped shut, the tag dangling with the coroner's initials. I stared at it, half expecting it to move, but it didn't. Just a bag, just a body. I pushed the drawer back, the clang reverberating in the silence. I checked the other drawers, the corners, even the ceiling vent. Nothing. I locked the door and went back to the security office, telling myself I'd overreacted. Back at the monitors, I couldn't stop myself. I pulled up the footage again, this time going back an hour. That's when I saw it, something I hadn't noticed before. At 1:17 a.m., the shadow wasn't just moving. It was crouching. It hovered over the John Doe drawer, its form flickering like a bad signal. Then, for a split second, the camera caught something else, a face. Not human, not entirely. It was pale, eyeless, with a mouth stretched too wide, like it was screaming without sound. The footage cut to static, then returned to normal. I froze. My skin prickled, and the room felt too small, the air too thick. I played it again, frame by frame. The face was there, unmistakable. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't my imagination. I copied the footage to a USB drive, my hands clumsy, and locked it in the desk drawer. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I couldn't let it stay on the system. The rest of the shift was torture. Every noise, the hum of the monitors, the creak of the building, made me jump. I kept checking the morgue feed, but it was quiet. Too quiet. When my relief showed up at 6 a.m., I didn't say a word. I just grabbed my coat and left. That night, I couldn't sleep. The face kept flashing in my mind. That silent scream burned into my brain. I tried to rationalize it, bad lighting, a prank, a hacked feed. But deep down, I knew it wasn't any of those things. The next day I called in sick. I couldn't go back, not yet. I watched the USB footage on my laptop, over and over, until my eyes ached. Each time, I noticed something new. The way the shadow seemed to pulse, the way the drawer's handle twitched like something was pulling it from the inside. I showed the footage to a friend, a tech guy who dabbles in paranormal stuff. He said it looked like an entity, something caught between. He told me to destroy the USB, to never go back to the morgue. I laughed it off, but I didn't sleep that night either. The dreams started, dark, formless things that left me waking in a cold sweat, my heart pounding like I'd been running. A week later, I returned to work. The morgue camera was down, under maintenance, they said. The John Doe body had been claimed by a distant cousin and sent to a funeral home. No one mentioned anything strange, but I caught the other guards giving me sidelong glances. I never told anyone about the footage. I couldn't. Who'd believe me? I still have the USB. I haven't watched it in months, but I can't bring myself to delete it. Sometimes late at night, I hear a faint scratching, like metal on metal, coming from nowhere. I tell myself it's the pipes, the wind, anything but what I saw. I regret watching that footage. I regret opening that drawer. Some things, once seen, don't let you go. They stay with you, waiting in the dark, just out of sight. I'd been a night janitor for 3 months, still new enough to jump at shadows, but seasoned enough to know the rhythm of the place. The job was simple: mop the floors, empty the trash, keep the place clean for the living and the dead. That night, though, something shifted, like a crack in the world I didn't know existed. It was around 2 a.m., and I was pushing my cart toward the basement level, where the cold storage morgue sat at the end of a long, sterile corridor. The hospital was old, built in the 1940s, and the basement always felt like it belonged to another time. Damp concrete walls, flickering lights, and a faint smell of antiseptic mixed with something earthier, like wet stone. I didn't like going down there, but it was part of the routine. Check the floors, wipe down the counters, and get out fast. As I stepped off the elevator, the air hit me, colder than usual, sharp enough to make my breath catch. The morgue was at the far end, past rows of locked doors and in used storage rooms. My sneakers squeaked on the linoleum, the sound echoing in a way that made me feel like I was being followed. I shook it off, told myself it was just the late hour playing tricks. But then I heard it, a soft, muffled sob. It came from the direction of the morgue, faint but unmistakable, like someone crying behind a closed door. I froze, my mop handle digging into my palm. The sound came again, a low, hiccuping wail, and my stomach twisted. I'd cleaned the morgue a dozen times, and it was always silent, dead silent, if you'll pardon the phrase. No one was supposed to be down here at this hour. The pathologists and coroners were long gone, and the bodies, well, they didn't make noise. I stood there listening, half expecting it to stop, to be my imagination or a pipe rattling in the walls. But it didn't. The crying grew louder, more desperate, like someone was trying to hold it in but couldn't. It wasn't a scream, not even close, just this raw, broken sound that made my chest ache. I thought about radioing security, but my walkie-talkie was back on the cart, and besides, what would I say? Hey, I hear crying in the morgue. They'd think I was losing it. I took a step forward, then another, my heart hammering so loud I could feel it in my ears. The corridor stretched out, the morgue door looming at the end, a heavy steel thing with a small, frosted window. The crying was definitely coming from inside, no question now. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a staff member was in there, grieving over a patient. Maybe it was a prank, some orderly messing with me. But deep down, I knew those explanations didn't fit. The sound wasn't right. It was too hollow, like it was coming from somewhere deeper than a person's throat. I reached the door and pressed my ear against it, the metal cold against my skin. The crying stopped for a moment, and I held my breath, hoping it was over. Then it started again, sharper, closer, like whoever it was knew I was there. My hand hovered over the handle. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to grab my cart and pretend I hadn't heard a thing. But something else, curiosity, or maybe stupidity, pushed me forward. I turned the handle and stepped inside. The morgue was a long, narrow room with stainless steel tables and rows of refrigerated drawers along the walls. The air was freezing, thick with the chemical tang of formaldehyde. The lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows. The crying was louder now, echoing off the tiles, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It seemed to bounce around like it was everywhere and nowhere at once. "Hello!" I called, my voice shaking. "Is someone here?" The crying stopped. The silence was worse, heavy and expectant, like the room was waiting for me to do something. I scanned the drawers, each one labeled with a name and a number. My eyes landed on one in the corner, slightly ajar, just enough to let a sliver of darkness peek through. My mouth went dry. I told myself it was probably a mistake, a drawer left open by a careless tech. But the crying started again, and this time, I was sure, it was coming from that drawer. I don't know why I didn't run. Maybe it was the way the sound pulled at me, like a hook in my chest. I walked over, my footsteps loud in the quiet, and stood in front of the drawer. The label read Jane Doe, number 47. No date, no other details. Just a name that wasn't really a name. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. I told myself I'd just peek, make sure no one was trapped inside, impossible as that seemed. I pulled the drawer open. The cold air hit me first, then the sight. A body covered with a white sheet, still and silent. No movement, no life. Just a shape under the cloth. But the crying didn't stop. It was louder now, coming from the body itself, though the sheet didn't move, didn't flutter with breath. I stood there, paralyzed, as the sound grew into a wail, sharp and piercing, like grief itself had a voice. I yanked the sheet back before I could think better of it. The woman underneath was young, maybe in her 20s, her skin pale and waxy, her eyes closed. She looked peaceful, except for the tears. They streamed down her face, impossible tears, glistening in the fluorescent light. Her lips were still, her chest unmoving, but the crying was hers. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short gasps, and tripped over a tray, sending metal instruments clattering to the floor. The noise snapped me out of it. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding, and slammed the drawer shut. The crying stopped instantly, like a switch had been flipped. The room was silent again, just the hum of the refrigerators and my own ragged breathing. I backed toward the door, not taking my eyes off the drawer, half expecting it to slide open again. I didn't tell anyone. Not security, not my supervisor, not even my girlfriend when I got home. What could I say? That I'd heard a dead woman cry? That I'd seen tears on a corpse's face? They'd think I was drunk or crazy, and maybe I was. I finished my shift in a daze, avoiding the basement, and quit the job a week later. I couldn't go back down there, couldn't face that door again. I still dream about it sometimes, the sound of her crying, the way it echoed in my bones. I looked up Jane Doe number 47 later, when I was brave enough to check the hospital records through a friend. She was an overdose case, found alone in an alley, no family, no one to claim her. I don't know what happened to her body, or why she cried. Maybe it was her soul, trapped in that cold drawer, grieving for a life cut short. Or maybe it was just me, hearing things in the dark. But I know what I heard, what I saw. And I know I'll never forget it. It started with a case like any other. John Doe, mid-30s, found in an alley off 7th Street. No ID, no witnesses, just a body stiff with rigor mortis under a flickering street lamp. The police dropped him off at the morgue around 2 a.m., and I was on call. I remember the rain that night, drumming against the windows of the county morgue, a low hum that made the place feel even more hollow than usual. I suited up, gown, gloves, mask, and wheeled the body into the exam room. He was unremarkable at first glance. Pale, medium build, no obvious signs of trauma. His clothes were soaked, a cheap jacket and jeans, nothing in the pockets but lint and a crumpled receipt from a diner. I started the external exam, noting the usual details: height, weight, lividity. His eyes were cloudy, pupils fixed, but something about them unnerved me. They seemed watchful, even in death. I shook it off. Fatigue, I told myself. I'd been working doubles all week. The internal exam was where things got strange. His organs were pristine, too pristine. Heart, lungs, liver, all textbook perfect, like they'd been plucked from an anatomy model. No signs of disease, no toxins in the prelim blood work. But there was something else. His stomach was empty, not just of food, but of any residue, like it had been scrubbed clean. I've seen fasting victims, starvation cases, but this was different. It was unnatural. I dictated my findings into the recorder, my voice steady despite the growing unease in my gut. By 4 a.m., I'd finished the autopsy and stitched him up. I typed the report myself, as always, on the ancient desktop in my office. Cause of death, undetermined, pending further tests. I noted the pristine organs, the empty stomach, the lack of external trauma. I saved the file, printed a hard copy for the police, and locked it in the cabinet. Standard procedure. I went home, showered off the morgue's chill, and tried to sleep. But those eyes haunted me. The next morning, I got a call from Detective Ramirez, the lead on the case. "Doc, what's with the report?" he asked, his voice tight. "What do you mean?" I said, already halfway out the door to head back to the morgue. "It's blank. Not a word on it." I laughed, thinking it was a mix-up. "I wrote it last night. Full report, 6 pages. Check the file again." "I'm holding the printout," he said. "It's blank. Digital file too. Nothing." My stomach dropped. I told him I'd check the system, and got to the morgue in record time. The office was just as I'd left it, coffee mug on the desk, chair slightly askew. I booted up the computer and opened the report. Blank. Not a single character, not even a timestamp. I checked the backup drive. Blank. The hard copy in the locked cabinet. Blank, crisp white pages, like they'd never been touched by ink. I sat there, staring at the empty screen, my pulse hammering. I'd written that report. I'd felt the keys under my fingers, heard the printer hum as it spat out the pages. I wasn't losing it. I pulled the audio recorder from the exam room and played back my dictation. Static. Not a word, just a low, buzzing hum that made my teeth ache. I rewound, played it again. Same thing. It was like the case had been erased. I called IT, thinking it was a glitch. They found nothing wrong with the system. No viruses, no corrupted files, just nothing. Ramirez showed up an hour later, his face a mix of irritation and concern. "You okay, Doc? You look like you saw a ghost." "I wrote the damn report," I snapped, shoving the blank pages at him. "I don't know what's going on." He raised an eyebrow but didn't push. Instead, he asked me to walk him through the autopsy again. I did, step by step, from memory. The pristine organs, the empty stomach, those unnerving eyes. He took notes, but I could tell he was skeptical. "We'll run the talk screen again," he said. "Maybe something'll turn up." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those blank pages, hearing that static. I went back to the morgue at midnight, badge in hand, half expecting the body to be gone. But John Doe was still there, lying on the slab in drawer 3. I pulled the sheet back and stared at him. His eyes were open again, though I'd swear I'd closed them. They weren't just cloudy now, they were wrong, like they were looking through me, not at me. I didn't touch him. I couldn't. Instead, I checked the security footage. The morgue has cameras in every room, motion activated. I pulled up the footage from the exam. There I was, 2:17 a.m., starting the autopsy. The video was clear. I was moving, cutting, dictating. But the body, it didn't look right. The image flickered like a bad signal, and for a split second, the table was empty. Then he was back, lying there, still as stone. I rewound, watched again. Same flicker, same empty table. My hands were shaking as I shut off the monitor. The next day, the talk screen came back clean. No drugs, no poisons, nothing. Ramirez called to say they'd ID'd the guy, Michael Harper, a drifter with no family, no record. They closed the case as natural causes, despite my protests. No evidence, Doc, Ramirez said. You know how it works. But I couldn't let it go. I started digging. I pulled old case files, cross-referenced anything similar. Nothing matched. I checked the security system logs, the computer's access history. No unauthorized entries, no tampering. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, had wiped that report clean. Weeks passed, and I tried to move on. But last night, I got an email. No sender, no subject line. Just a single attachment, a PDF. I opened it, and my blood ran cold. It was my report, word for word, exactly as I'd written it. At the bottom, in red text, was a single line. You weren't supposed to see. I haven't slept since. I keep the report locked in a safe now, the only proof I'm not crazy. But every time I pass the morgue, I feel those eyes on me. I don't know what Michael Harper was, or what wanted his story erased. All I know is that I'm done with autopsies. Some truths aren't meant to be written down. I was a maintenance tech, the guy who fixed flickering lights, unclogged drains, and made sure the ancient HVAC system didn't give up the ghost. The hospital was old, built in the 1940s, with creaky floors and walls that seemed to hum with stories nobody wanted to tell. The morgue was in the basement, a place I avoided unless absolutely necessary. But that October, necessity came knocking. It was around 2 a.m. when I got the call from Nancy, the night nurse supervisor. Her voice was tight, like she was trying not to sound spooked. The freezer door in the morgue keeps popping open, she said. Can you check it out? I groaned inwardly. The morgue gave me the creeps, but I grabbed my toolkit and headed down. The basement was a maze of dim corridors, lit by fluorescent bulbs that buzzed like dying insects. The morgue was at the far end, behind a heavy steel door with a small window. I pushed it open, and the cold hit me like a slap. The room was small, maybe 15 by 20 feet, with a stainless steel autopsy table in the center and 3 freezer units along the back wall. The air smelled of antiseptic and something sharper, like frozen metal and faint decay. The freezer in question was the middle one, its door ajar by about an inch. A thin sliver of icy mist curled out, pooling on the floor. I set my toolbox down and inspected the latch. It seemed fine, no obvious damage, no broken parts. I closed the door, heard the satisfying click of the lock, and gave it a tug. Solid. I figured someone hadn't shut it properly, maybe a tech rushing during a busy shift. I radioed Nancy to let her know it was fixed, and headed back upstairs. 2 nights later, my pager buzzed again. Same problem. Morgue freezer. I trudged back down, half annoyed, half curious. Sure enough, the door was open again, this time a little wider. The mist was thicker, like the freezer was exhaling. I checked the latch more thoroughly, springs, hinges, the whole mechanism. Everything was in working order. I even tested the seal, pressing my weight against the door to make sure it held. It did. I closed it, locked it, and waited a minute, staring at the handle like it might move on its own. It didn't. I chalked it up to a fluke and left. The third time it happened, I wasn't alone. It was a week later, and I dragged my co-worker, Eddie, along. Eddie was a big guy, ex-military, not easily rattled. We were in the break room when Nancy called, her voice now openly uneasy. It's that damn freezer again, she said. I swear, it's like someone's messing with us. Eddie raised an eyebrow, but followed me downstairs. When we got to the morgue, the freezer door was wide open. Not cracked, not ajar, fully swung out, like someone had yanked it hard. The cold poured out in waves, and the room felt wrong. Like the air was too heavy, pressing against my chest. Eddie whistled low. That's not normal, he said, shining his flashlight into the freezer. The shelves were mostly empty, just a couple of body bags in the back, their tags fluttering in the draft. I checked the latch again, my fingers numb from the cold. Still nothing broken. Eddie watched, arms crossed, his breath visible in the chilly air. Maybe it's the pressure, he suggested. Like, the freezer's too cold, and it's popping the seal. It was a decent theory, so we adjusted the thermostat, closed the door, and waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. The door stayed shut. Satisfied, we left. But it didn't stop. Over the next few weeks, the freezer kept opening. Sometimes it was just a crack, sometimes it swung wide like it was inviting us in. Nancy stopped calling it in. She'd just glare at me when I passed her station, like I was failing at my job. I started dreading the basement, but I couldn't avoid it. I tried everything, replaced the latch, checked the wiring, even had the cooling system serviced. Nothing worked. Then came the night I saw it happen. It was late, maybe 3 a.m., and I was alone in the morgue, triple-checking the freezer after another report. I just closed the door and was packing up my tools when I heard it, a soft metallic click. I froze. Slowly, I turned toward the freezer. The handle was moving. Not fast, not like someone was pulling it, but slow, deliberate, like it was being nudged from the inside. The door creaked open, just an inch, then stopped. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it into the gap. Nothing but cold air and shadows. I slammed the door shut and backed away, my hands shaking. I didn't tell anyone, not Nancy, not Eddie. They'd think I was losing it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was in there, something that didn't want the door closed. I started avoiding the morgue altogether, taking the long way around the basement to dodge that hallway. A few days later, Eddie cornered me in the break room. "You okay, man?" he asked. "You look like you haven't slept in a week." I hesitated, then spilled everything, the click, the handle, the door opening on its own. To my surprise, he didn't laugh. He leaned in, voice low. "I talked to one of the old janitors," he said. "Guy who worked here in the 80s. He said that freezer's been trouble for years. Said it started after some patient died down there, back when the morgue was still used for autopsies. Never got the details, but he swore the guy's body kept getting found outside the freezer, like it was trying to leave." I didn't want to believe it, but it fit. The hospital was old, full of ghosts if you believed the rumors. I wasn't a superstitious guy, but I couldn't explain what I'd seen. Eddie and I made a pact. We'd handle the morgue calls together. No one goes down alone. The last incident was the worst. We got the call around midnight, and we headed down, both of us on edge. The freezer door was open again, but this time, one of the body bags was halfway out, like it had been dragged. The tag said John Doe, October 12th, 25. Neither of us touched it. We just stood there, staring, until Eddie finally said, "We're not paid enough for this." We pushed the bag back in, locked the freezer, and got the hell out. The next day, I put in my notice. I didn't care about the job market or the bills. I couldn't do it anymore. The hospital replaced the freezer a month later, and I heard the problem stopped. But I never went back. Even now, years later, I can't walk past a hospital without thinking of that door, the way it opened like it was breathing, and the feeling that something was watching, waiting for me to step inside. It was a Tuesday night, just past midnight, when I first noticed it. I was prepping a body for autopsy, a middle-aged man found in his car at the edge of town. Heart attack, they figured, though the coroner would confirm it in the morning. His skin was waxy, his eyes half open, staring at nothing. But his mouth, it was frozen in a rictus of terror, lips pulled back, teeth bared like he'd seen something unspeakable in his final moments. I paused, my gloved hands hovering over the sheet. I'd seen plenty of bodies by then, accident victims, overdoses, the elderly who'd slipped away in their sleep. Most had slack, peaceful expressions, or at worst, a faint grimace. This was different. His face looked like it had been carved from fear itself. I shook it off, chalking it up to rigor mortis or some quirk of physiology. I finished tagging him, slid him into the cooler, and locked up for the night. But the image lingered, his wide eyes burning into my memory as I drove home through the quiet streets. The next week, another body came in. A young woman, early 20s, drowned in the lake. Freak accident, the report said. She'd been swimming alone at dusk, maybe caught in a current. Her face was bloated from the water, but there it was again. That same terrified expression, lips twisted, eyes bulging like she'd seen something in the depths. I checked the report twice, looking for some explanation, drugs, trauma, anything. Nothing. Just a healthy woman who'd gone for a swim and never came back. I started paying attention after that. Over the next month, more bodies came through, and too many of them had it, that same frozen scream. A construction worker who'd fallen from a scaffold, a retiree who'd collapsed in his kitchen, a teenager who'd wrapped his motorcycle around a tree. Different ages, different causes, but always that expression, like they'd all glimpsed the same horror in their final seconds. I began to dread opening the body bags, knowing what I'd see. I mentioned it to my supervisor, Carla, one morning over coffee in the break room. She'd been in the business for 20 years, seen it all, or so she claimed. "You're imagining things," she said, stirring sugar into her mug. Death does funny stuff to faces. Rigor, gas, muscle contractions. Don't let it get in your head. But her eyes flicked away when she said it, and I wondered if she'd noticed it too. I couldn't let it go. I started keeping a notebook, jotting down details about each case. Names, ages, causes of death, anything that might connect them. There was no pattern, at least none I could see. They were strangers, their lives unlinked except for the way they'd died, with that same horrified stare. I'd lie awake at night, replaying their faces, wondering what they'd seen. Was it just biology like Carla said? Or was it something else? One night, I stayed late, pulling files from the archives. I went back 6 months, then a year, cross-referencing cases. The deeper I dug, the more I found. Not every body had it, but enough did, maybe 1 in 10 scattered across time. A nurse who'd overdosed in 23, a hiker who'd fallen in 22, a kid who'd choked on a piece of candy in 21. All with that expression, like they'd been running from something they couldn't escape. I started to feel watched. The morgue, always quiet, felt heavier, like the air itself was pressing down. I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows. Once, I swore I heard a whisper, a low, guttural sound from the cooler, but when I checked, it was just the hum of the refrigeration unit. I told myself I was tired, overworked, but the feeling grew. Then came the night that broke me. It was a slow shift, just me and a new body, a man in his 30s, found in his apartment. No signs of foul play, just a sudden collapse. Natural causes, pending autopsy. I unzipped the bag, and there it was, that same terrified expression, eyes wide, mouth contorted. But this time, something was different. His eyes, they weren't just open. They were locked on me. I froze, my heart pounding. It was impossible. He was dead, his pupils fixed and dilated. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was seeing me, that something was looking through him. I stepped back, my breath shallow, and that's when I heard it, a faint, rasping sound like a word trying to form. It came from his direction, though his lips didn't move. I stumbled backward, knocking over a tray of instruments. The clatter echoed in the empty room. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my car outside the morgue until dawn, gripping the steering wheel, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But I knew what I'd heard, what I'd felt. The next day I called in sick. Then the day after that. I couldn't go back, not yet. I started researching, diving into forums and old medical texts, looking for anything that might explain it. I found stories, urban legends mostly, about death masks, faces frozen in fear because the soul had seen something on the other side. Some cultures believed it was a demon, others a harbinger of judgment. Nothing scientific, nothing concrete, but it was enough to make me question everything. When I finally returned to work, I avoided the cooler as much as I could. I stuck to paperwork, let the other assistants handle the bodies. But I couldn't avoid it forever. A week later, I was assigned to prep a new case, a woman mid-40s, heart failure. I braced myself as I unzipped the bag, and there it was, that same expression, eyes wide, mouth twisted in terror. I worked quickly, my hands shaking, and when I slid her into the cooler, I swore I saw her eyes twitch, just for a second. That was my last shift. I quit the next day, left my badge on Carla's desk, and walked out. She didn't ask why, just nodded like she'd seen it before. I moved to a new city, took a job at a warehouse, something mundane, far from death. But I still see those faces in my dreams, every one of them, staring, screaming without sound. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, I hear that rasping whisper again, like something's trying to tell me what they saw. I don't know what it is. I don't want to know. But I can't help wondering if it's still out there, waiting for the next one to die with that same terrified expression.